All right, strap in, everyone. Today we are going deep. We're talking lost civilizations, ancient mysteries, and maybe even rewriting history.
Sounds exciting.
Oh, it is. We're diving into Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods.
A classic.
It is. And we're going to unearth some incredible clues. We've got ancient maps, mysterious monuments, myths from all over the world. The whole shebang.
So what's the big idea behind Fingerprints of the Gods?
Well, Hancock basically throws out the conventional timeline of history and proposes that there was a lost advanced civilization way before any of the ones we typically learn about.
Okay, that's a bold claim. So what kind of evidence does he present to support this?
Well, he brings in some pretty compelling stuff. Let's start with the Piri Reis Map.
Ah, yes, the map from 1513 that supposedly shows Antarctica.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until centuries later. So how did they map a continent that was buried under ice?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
It is, and that's where things get really interesting. Hancock suggests that the Piri Reis Map is based on even older source maps, possibly from a time when Antarctica was ice-free.
So he's saying there was a civilization with the technology to not only explore Antarctica, but to accurately map it.
Right, and that would completely change our understanding of ancient civilizations and their capabilities.
Pretty mind-blowing stuff.
Oh, yeah, totally. And the Piri Reis Map isn't the only one that raises these questions. There's also the Orontius Finesse Map from 1531.
Right, and that one shows even more of Antarctica, with possible rivers and mountains.
Exactly. And if those features were actually there, then the source map for the Orontius Finesse Map had to have been made when Antarctica was a completely different place.
A place without all that ice.
Yeah. So we're not just talking about some random scribbles on old parchment. These maps could be windows into a level of technology that we didn't think existed back then.
And they could also be evidence for this lost civilization that Hancock is talking about.
Right. It's like finding a blueprint for a skyscraper in a medieval village.
It just wouldn't fit.
Exactly. So where else do these fingerprints of a lost civilization show up? Well, Hancock takes us to the Bolivian Andes, to the ruins of Tijuana.
Tijuana. With those massive stone structures.
You got it. Huge megaliths, precisely fitted together,
Yeah.
seemingly way beyond the capabilities of the cultures that we know inhabited that region.
They really are incredible. I remember seeing pictures of those stone blocks. They're huge, like way bigger than Stonehenge.
Oh, yeah, definitely a whole other level. We're talking blocks that weigh over 100 tons, perfectly interlocked without any mortar.
It boggles the mind how they managed to do that.
Right, and there's this one structure called the Sunken Temple with an enigmatic face that's thought to represent Viracocha.
Viracocha, the godlike figure from South American mythology.
That's the one. Okay, so we have these advanced maps, these mind-blowing megaliths in South America. Is there anything that connects them?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. Hancock points to the fact that flood myths appear in cultures all over the world.
Oh yeah, the flood myth is pretty universal, isn't it?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if there's some kernel of truth hidden in those stories. Maybe a shared memory of some kind of global cataclysm.
Like some kind of event that would have been so traumatic that it became embedded in the collective memory of humanity.
Right. And it might even have been the event that wiped out this advanced civilization that Hancock proposes.
Now that is one wild theory.
It is, and it makes you think.
It does, and it leads us right to another big piece of the puzzle, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
The most famous pyramid of them all.
Exactly. But it's not just the size of the pyramid that's amazing, it's also the precision of its construction and the mystery surrounding it. Like, it's almost perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions.
You're right, it's aligned with true north with incredible accuracy.
Exactly. How did they manage that without any modern tools? And then there are those mysterious shafts inside the pyramid.
Oh yeah, the shafts that some people think were aligned with specific stars.
Yes. And Hancock suggests that the Great Pyramid, along with the Sphinx and the other structures on the Giza Plateau, could hold clues to this lost civilization and the cataclysm that might have wiped them out.
Now that is an intriguing idea.
It is, isn't it? We've got ancient maps, megaliths in South America, flood myths, and now the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. It's like we're piecing together a giant puzzle.
A puzzle that could change how we understand our own history.
Right. And who knows what other secrets we might uncover along the way. This is going to be a wild ride.
Okay, so let's get back to the Great Pyramid and some of the things that make it so fascinating. One of the things that Hancock really focuses on is that precise alignment with true north.
Yeah. I mean, how did they manage that kind of accuracy without any of the tools that we have today? It's just incredible.
It really is. The level of precision involved just suggests that they had such an advanced understanding of, well, astronomy and mathematics.
Yeah, way beyond what we typically, like, even give the ancient Egyptians credit for.
Yeah, it's almost like they were tapping into some kind of knowledge, like, well, from somewhere else.
That's kind of what Hancock is suggesting, right? Like, this knowledge could have been inherited from a previous civilization.
That's right. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the internal structure of the pyramid. There are these shafts.
Oh, yeah, the mysterious shafts.
Yeah.
Two leading upwards from the king's chamber and two downwards from the queen's chamber.
Right. And people have been trying to figure out what these shafts were for centuries. But Hancock picks up on the work of Robert Bauval, who suggests that these shafts were actually intentionally aligned with specific stars.
Wait, so these shafts are like what? Ancient telescopes pointing at the stars? What stars are we talking about here?
Well, according to Bauval's theory, the shafts in the king's chamber, they were aligned with the stars in Orion's belt. And the shafts in the queen's chamber, they align with Sirius and Kochab.
Okay, so those are some pretty significant stars, but what is that alignment like? What does it tell us?
Well, the really interesting thing is that the alignment, it corresponds to the position of those stars. Get this, around 10,500 BC.
10,500 BC. That's like way before the generally accepted time frame for the construction of the pyramids. So what are we supposed to make of that?
Well, this is kind of where Hancock's and Bauval's theories really come together.
Mhm.
They're suggesting that the pyramids at Giza, they weren't really built as tombs at all. They were designed as a message, like a time capsule, a message encoded in stone that points to this specific epoch, possibly the time when this lost civilization was flourishing.
Wow, that's a really fascinating idea. But what about, I mean, if they weren't tombs, what about all the mummies and burial goods that have been found inside the pyramids?
Yeah, that's a good question. Hancock's argument is that the pyramids were repurposed later on by the dynastic Egyptians.
So, like, they found these ancient structures, realized that they were important in some way, and incorporated them into their own belief system.
Yeah, that's the idea. Like, they might not have understood everything about the pyramids, but they recognized their significance and incorporated them into their own culture.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And Hancock suggests that this idea of repurposing, it applies to other ancient sites as well, like, for example, the Sphinx.
Yeah, with those weathering patterns suggesting that it could be much older than we typically think.
Exactly, like way older, possibly dating back to when the Sahara Desert was actually a fertile savanna.
Right. And Hancock's proposing that the dynastic Egyptians, they might have just carved their own features onto this pre-existing monument, one that had already been there for, like, thousands of years.
Wow, that's a crazy idea. It's almost like they were adding their own layer to history.
Yeah, a history that was way older than they even realized.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, what else is out there? What other secrets are buried beneath the sand, just waiting to be uncovered?
Yeah, I mean, we might just be scratching the surface of a history that's way more complex than we ever imagined. It's kind of unsettling in a way.
It is. It kind of makes you realize how little we actually know about the past. And it's especially unsettling when you think about the possibility that this civilization, they could have been wiped out by some kind of cataclysmic event. Like, if Hancock is right, well, it really raises questions about, our own civilization's vulnerability.
Right. History can repeat itself. Even the most advanced societies aren't immune to the forces of nature, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe those ancient myths and monuments, maybe they're trying to tell us something, like a warning about the dangers that might be ahead.
It's a sobering thought. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the ancient maps, the mysteries of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, but there's one piece of the puzzle that we haven't really explored yet, and that's those recurring numbers that Hancock keeps talking about, like 72 and 432,000.
Yeah. Those numbers seem to pop up everywhere, from the ancient myths to the, sacred geometry.
And Hancock thinks that these are more than just coincidences. He sees them as clues to some kind of unified system of knowledge, like a system that was shared by this lost civilization. So let's break it down. What's the significance of these numbers? What do they tell us?
Okay, well, let's start with the number 72. It's connected to the precession of the equinoxes.
Precession of the equinoxes. Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details. Can you give me like a quick refresher on what that even is?
Yeah, sure. So imagine the Earth spinning like a top.
Okay.
But now imagine that top is slowly wobbling as it spins.
Ah, I see.
So that wobble, that's the precession of the equinoxes. And it takes about Roughly 72 years for the Earth's axis to shift just 1 degree along that wobble.
Wow, so it's a super slow process, but I guess it has a pretty big impact over time, right?
Oh, definitely. And Hancock points out that if you multiply 72 by 600, you get 43,200.
Okay.
And that number, well, we've seen that before. Remember how the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, they kind of seem to reflect the Earth's dimensions, but scaled down by a factor of 43,200.
Oh, wow, you're right. It's like those numbers are popping up all over the place in Hancock's research. And wait, 432,000, that rings a bell too. Wasn't that something to do with ancient Hindu cosmology?
Exactly. It's the number of years in a Kali Yuga.
Right, which is a major cycle in Hindu cosmology.
Yeah. And Hancock, he doesn't stop there. He even connects those numbers to, like, modern scientific measurements, like the Earth's diameter and the speed of light.
Hold on, the speed of light, that seems like kind of a stretch. How does that even work?
Yeah, I'll admit some of the connections he makes might seem a little far-fetched, but his point is that these numbers, they appear in so many different contexts. From ancient myths to sacred geometry to astronomical calculations. It kind of makes you think that maybe there was some deliberate encoding of knowledge, by this lost civilization.
So, like, they were leaving behind clues, little breadcrumbs, about a system of knowledge that we're just now beginning to rediscover.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. And I think, whether or not you agree with all of Hancock's conclusions, I mean, his research really forces us to think about the possibility that there might be a deeper, more interconnected system of knowledge than we typically think about.
Yeah, definitely a lot to ponder there. But, we haven't really talked about one of the most dramatic parts of Hancock's theory yet, and that's the idea of a global cataclysm that wiped out this lost civilization. It's one thing to talk about, ancient maps and numbers, but a global cataclysm, that's a pretty heavy concept.
It is, and Hancock approaches it very carefully. He doesn't just throw out this idea of a cataclysm as just speculation. He brings in a lot of different kinds of evidence, myths about floods and fires, earthquakes from all these different cultures around the world. And then he also looks at geological data, stuff that suggests pretty dramatic shifts in the Earth's climate and even the possibility of, like, big shifts in the Earth's crust.
Okay, so we're talking about an event that would have reshaped the planet, right? Something like an asteroid impact. Or maybe like massive volcanic eruptions.
Yeah, those are definitely some of the possibilities that he explores. He talks about things like, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Right, which suggests that an impact like 12,800 years ago might have like triggered all these extinctions and messed up the climate.
Exactly. And he also discusses, what could happen if you had a bunch of massive volcanic eruptions, things that could cause global cooling, really mess with ecosystems.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of scary to think about how fragile civilization really is. Like even these advanced societies, they can just get wiped out by forces that are totally outside their control.
It is a sobering thought. And Hancock's work is definitely a reminder that, well, history can repeat itself. And, maybe those ancient myths and monuments, maybe they are trying to, tell us something about that. Give us a little warning about the dangers that could be out there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway from all of this?
Well, I don't think Hancock is trying to give us all the answers. I think what he's really doing is challenging us, to keep exploring, keep questioning those conventional narratives, keep an open mind about the possibility that history might be a lot more complex and mysterious than we think it is. And the search for the fingerprints of the gods, well, it's an ongoing thing, and every new discovery has the potential to, change how we understand the past.
That's for sure. Well, this deep dive has been a wild ride. We've covered some serious ground here today. Ancient maps, megalithic structures, flood myths, math mysteries, all of it. And, whether or not you buy into everything that Hancock's saying, you got to admit his work makes you think. It reminds us that the human story is still being written and that the quest for knowledge, well, it's a journey that never really ends. So thanks for joining us on this incredible exploration. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep an open mind to the mysteries of the past.